Okay, hi Joanne, hi Jim. Thank you so much for joining me here today on Vonvo.com. It is March 2nd, 2013. I just wanted to go over two quick items before we got started with our conversation on the revolution in Syria. The first is that right now this conversation is being recorded, and after the recording's complete, I'll be uploading the conversation to YouTube. Is that okay with both of you?
Fine. No problem.
Great. And then next, on top of that, here at Vonvo, we are all about our conversations staying both civil and valuable. We don't want there to be any personal attacks on anyone. Are you guys okay with those ground rules?
Absolutely.
Perfect. Okay, so...
I'm not going to shout at you, Jim.
Okay.
Although you can poke or kid around all you like. I don't suffer from humor. I take it as medicine.
Oh, I see.
All right, so guys, we're here to discuss the revolution in Syria. Before we get started, for anyone who's inside the room, viewing and watching our conversation, Jim, would you mind just giving a quick background of yourself, what you do, and how you got so passionate about this subject? And then, Joanne, you can go next.
How brief or
take a minute or two to inform our viewers. That's all.
Okay. I just want to thank right away the people that actually even got me to be able to be exposed to what was happening. Firstly, so I never knew. I was quite scared, and so was my wife. But either way, she opened up the Facebook account, and I met up with a friend I was in the Marine Corps with. He was involved in Iranian revolution and quite bitter about how things ended for them. And he was outspoken for the human rights violations over there. And when Syria started, and I think probably the whole Arab Spring, he was watching. But I was not on the internet. I didn't know. And just like many, I suffered from the lack of news sources, not only that paid attention, that also were suffering from their own agendas. So when I saw what was happening, pretty much because my friend shared it and I was friends with him, I started laying out the groundwork of how to manipulate the internet, because I was completely like walking in the dark with mousetraps. And so I taught myself how to maneuver on the internet, how to be on Facebook with getting friends and reaching out to different communities. While I was doing all the groundwork, I was very emotionally affected by what I was seeing. A few incidences were when people would reach out to the soldiers that were shooting at the protesters, and those people would defect. Those moments, for me, just struck a chord of courage to me. Going up on top of a tank and asking for the guy to stop killing the people, that all of a sudden it just clicked in me. So I looked further. I started going into the Arabic pages where a lot of the news was actually originating from. And the things I saw forced me to learn, forced me to not be ignorant anymore, cracked the shell of blissful ignorance that I kind of had in my life. And after that point, there was no going back. I mean, I had to find out everything I knew about the country, the culture, the language, the people, everything. Because if I was going to be emotionally attached, I had to connect everything else. So I started reaching out, and I started trying to remember how to be creative again, how to be diverse so that I could find people, not the internet, to actually source for information. So I remembered I had a dentist from a long time ago. She was Syrian, and we actually talked about the Tunisian uprising and everything that happened, and we thought, no way it's coming to Syria, because she was Syrian. So I reached out to her, and I said, my God, and I cried in her office, because from here to being able to talk to somebody, completely different thing.
Right.
You get that human element, and it just, everything cracked. I felt Syrian. I felt like these children that I saw hurt were mine.
Right.
So then she gave me, go to this town hall meeting. So I went to the town hall meeting. The whole thing's in Arabic. And I have to tell you, I was fearful. I was ignorant, but I still sat in the whole time. There was a fist fight between the people there, because there was pro-Assad there, and there was people for the revolution.
Right. Yeah.
It didn't stop me. So I went and I started protesting. I started meeting people. I started learning, and then everything else happened.
Got it. Great. And
Just
Joanne,
kind of summarize.
right. And Joanne, how about yourself?
I started at the beginning of the Iraqi war. I had some students that I used to help with their English, and they were telling me day by day what was happening there. And then they put me in touch with a family that needed help with English documents and things. So we carried on being friends for a while, and then they eventually were able to get out of Iraq, out of Baghdad, into Damascus. And when they got there, they asked me if I'd do them the honour of coming over and meeting them. So I did this, and I found that these people were so warm-hearted, and they'd suffered so much. They'd had a brother that was kidnapped, tortured, and killed, and we've remained friends since. And I've carried on. It then went over to the Iranian Revolution, as Jim said. I had friends before the revolution, and some of them were killed there. And like Jim, I'm very, very emotional about what happened to them. A close friend of mine was shot as he peacefully protested. And then there was the Tunisian, then the Egyptian, and now the Syrian. And I think the Syrian one is by far the worst of what I've seen. And it really is an emotional thing. Seeing what man can do to man, it just doesn't seem possible, Jim, does it?
Right. What were you going to say, Jim?
If she could speak closer to the mic, it's not her accent; it's just the volume.
Oh yeah. So Joanne, could you just put the mic closer to your mouth? So that can you try that now?
Is this any better, Jim?
Oh yeah, that's great.
Usually they tell me I'm too loud.
I'm not good at nodding on and pretending I can hear. I was getting bits and pieces.
All right.
Yeah.
Great. So Jim, what is your take on the recent developments which have taken place inside of Syria? There's a lot of talk about rebels and Assad regime killing innocent people. I mean, can you just give us your overall take on what is currently taking place inside of its borders?
Sure. I mean, I can give you my opinion. Because of certain people that we work with in Syria, there are people that are on the ground, not only fighting but also conducting journalistic work. They give us some information that's happening in certain areas of Syria, and I feel that there is a vacuum. There is a source of forces that are counterproductive to what I think the vast mass of Syrians want. They want similar to what they had before, in sense that everyone lived harmoniously, but not under the corruption, not under the oppression, not under the lack of economic and diverse abilities that are afforded us. And so those groups are also among the best fighters. So, it's very hard to judge anybody by the source of a few actions of some of their members. So I think that violations that have occurred, human rights violations, have been highlighted for the members that are fighting the government and somehow dumbed down by the other Assad forces, militiamen, and so forth. So I think there's a lot of disservice and misdirection being used in the media. What I feel about the Syrian revolution is I don't think it's in a stalemate. I think that people are dying every day, and it's for freedom, it's for equality, it's for dignity, it's for justice. And you cannot judge what's going on in a war zone unless you're there. I was in Desert Storm, and there were members of my own, of my own Marine Corps that were doing things that were violations. But they were also maybe among the few that were completely experiencing stress, and not to justify any of their actions. And believe me, those people were under investigation. That's not completely capable in Syria. Not only did they lack a sound chain of command, but they lack basic lower level leadership. They lack experience in a war zone. They lack the ability to manipulate weapons, to strategically plan missions, to all these things. Now, you have somebody come in, whether it's the devil or the son of the devil come in, that's going to help you, I don't know, stay alive and possibly win a few battles in your neighborhood to keep your neighborhood safe. I'm sorry, you're going to take that help. And then you're going to hope like hell you don't have to fight them out the door when you've gotten your house back or you want to build it back up again.
Right.
And that's my view.
Right.
And I
go ahead, Joanne.
I want to say I agree with you 100%. We work together. We get this, a lot of the same information. Sometimes he gets a little bit more than I do. Sometimes I get some he doesn't get. But these fighters predominantly were just ordinary civilians with no military training whatsoever, and to be thrust into this, I think they've done marvellously well. They're extremely brave. I've seen such bravery that I've never seen before in any conflict, and I just hope that these guys are going to win this battle, because they deserve to. We can't carry on having innocent women and children slaughtered the way that, and it is slaughter. It's absolutely outrageous, and nobody is helping them from the outside. They're doing everything themselves.
The impossible with nothing. That's what I see it.
Yes. And to see what they get up to, making their own weapons, converting cars into little tanks. It's just amazing, what ingenuity these people have got.
And that's something else that really struck a chord with me. Is my background is not in activism. Let me preface this whole conversation with that. I was never an activist. I never ever spoke out in public, ever. I never, and I don't want a hand on the back for this. I'm just explaining that this isn't some kind of game for me. This is not some kind of job for me. This is my heart on my sleeve and my business from my head, and as well as I can conduct them. And that's why I've tried to teach myself. I don't want to be an ignorant person. I don't want to be overly academic. I'm not looking in the book for knowledge. I'm talking to people. I'm connecting with people, and I'm using this Facebook to do that. And that's the other thank you I want to give is to the creators, the monitors, the administrators of Facebook. I would never know if it wasn't for this. And I got to tell you, the first 2 months, I played games on the computer. Completely useless waste of my time. And I felt guilty for it. Now, the time I invest, although I need to prioritize better, is imparting a message to my children. And it's not one of hate. It's not one of war. It's not one of vacuous causes. It's that you can change the world. You can matter. And no matter how small the action is, if you've taken it, they'll return. And no matter how poor you are, you can be rich from the gifts that you give, from the love that you share, and from the hate that you can teach people is not really something that's helping the world. You can completely build a bridge. You don't have to exist on other sides of an island. You can learn about what you fear to those who need you, even though you don't even know if they would give you it back. And the rewards that you can receive are way beyond what you can imagine. And they can teach you and a lot of people around you that everything I've said, that you can make a difference. And that's what I've learned.
Right. Joanne, did you want to
And this is a great forum too, Max. I want to thank you for this because This is a way to have a conversation and for others to drop in without it being necessarily uncourteous. I've had Skype before, and everyone's like, So this is a good way to have a good conversation.
Thank you so much. Thank you for that.
Well said, Jim. Yeah.
Did you have
I
anything?
agree with everything you said. Yeah.
Okay, so great. So, ultimately then, why don't then we move into some other items, relative, directly with what's going on inside of Syria. There's a lot of talk, and I think actually one of our members inside the chat room, what are your guys' take on the idea of, the rebels inside of Syria? What is your overall, take? And Joanne, you can start on what the rebels are actually doing, where they're coming from, who they're representing. Can we kind of dig into this subject because it continues to come up here on Vonvo?
You could go, Joan. I just spoke.
Yeah. I'm very nervous, Jim. I'm not used to this, neither like you, and I don't want to put my foot in it. From the information I've had from my friends in Homs and Idlib, a lot of the initial Free Syrian Army were army. There were, a few that defected from the army because they didn't like what they were being told to do, and they're trying to train up ordinary people, and they're doing a pretty good job. Of course, there are, as you said, there are a few that do commit things they shouldn't. But on the whole, if you go into a house and you see women and children on the floor, slashed to bits, women had been raped, you feel angry. And if you saw one of those perpetrators outside, I'm sure you'd feel like just getting hold of him and giving him some punishment. I mean, I've always been a pacifist, but since I've been involved in this, it just makes me so angry. But, I think it's a hodgepodge of people that are in the FSA. They're all trying to do a good job. They're trying to get freedom and save their people. And I'm really, really amazed at what they've managed to achieve.
Right. Jim, where do you come from on this?
I would agree a lot with what Joan is saying. I basically started being aware of what was happening right around June. And so I paid very close attention every time I would see external forces coming into Syria. And I have to say, for a big part of the beginning of it, it was on commercial airlines, on Syrian soil in airports, from Hezbollah, from Iran. And then later on, they started matriculating from other borders. I think as the forces were getting weaker and more effective. As far as, this is just early on, and then as far as who had composed the FSA and other groups, I think a lot of them were defected soldiers, were civilians that were then, because there were, a set few areas where this violence began, and it's so also was the response. So in those areas, that's where a lot of people would defect from, and there was a lot of displacement going on. So I think a lot of it was forced upon them. And I have to say, early on, there were a lot of defections, but they weren't very often because there was such a fear, and as soon as somebody got wind of a defection, you were shot. And I can't tell you I can't count on my hands how many times I've worked and seen evidence of people shot because there was a fear of them defecting. And I think I'm still trying to understand exactly how they knew exactly when these people were going to defect. There's probably evidence of how they controlled their chain of command, because they would know right away. I know they kept confined that were in military in the Syrian army. And then to further go on, I think then when they started coming in from other countries, and it became very evident that the Free Syrian Army and the defected soldiers basically were not going to get outside help, people from about other revolutions started getting involved. And now this wasn't very, you couldn't see it. Being somebody that was not very familiar with the Middle East, I couldn't tell you looking at somebody or like I know my military, but I don't know the other militaries. But I know that there were people coming from Libya, from Egypt, and from the surrounding borders that had family in Syria that were getting targeted. And it seemed very much so that people were getting targeted who were helping support the journalists, support the videotaping, support people who defected, like an underground railroad almost of connections. And when somebody got wind of it, or there was a spy or something, then they would target the family, they would target the area they were from, they would round up people, they would detain people, and then later these torture videos would come out. And the very first one I've seen was the one it was an activist that was buried alive.
Right.
And there was a lot of propaganda, led on both sides. You see somebody dying, that could be used as propaganda.
Right.
In some sick way. But what I could tell you from the propaganda that I've experienced through the Syrian media, whether it be Sana or other units that support, their news, it seemed very biased. It seemed contrived. It seemed sloppy. The sources were almost always immediately revealed to be false, sometimes from other revolutions.
Right.
And that same mistake has happened also that's happened for the revolution, or Syrian uprising, if you wish to call it that.
Yep.
There's been people that have mistakenly taken photos from Palestine and used them for Syria or Iraq. Everyone's guilty of not necessarily getting the right source, fact-finding, and confirming things. But if the Syrian government would have allowed foreign journalists right off the bat, then, there would be that ability. So
right.
I hold the Syrian government responsible for there not being as quick and as concise a journalistic, information coming out of Syria.
Right.
Everyone wanted to get in, but no one was getting in. And if they got in, they got killed. As evidenced by Marie Colvin, Rami, and the Japanese journalists, people from Lebanon. I can't even give you a number of how many journalists have gotten killed. It's got to be at least 120 by now.
Right. So, Yaya, are you there? Did you have something that you wanted to come in here commenting on?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes, I hear you great. Jim and Joanne, do you
okay,
hear me?
good. I took the video off just so that I know my internet connection is not as strong as others, so I'm just going to use
that's
voice
fine
for now. I just wanted to make a comment about the question regarding the rebels and what the take is about who these rebels are and so forth. I lived in Syria from 2002 to 2004, on and off, and I met quite a few people who one might say, is just the regular Syrian, and which I consider to be, mostly the regular Syrians. And we had political discussions, of course, all of this during Bashar's time and his father's before him. You don't speak about politics in public, so they might give you one answer in public and another answer in private. This was back in the early 2000s. But during that time, it was clearly apparent that the people wanted change. The people did want change, and from at least the people I spoke to, obviously I hung out with a certain type of person, but the people I spoke to, they did want an Islamic change to the country. They didn't want the current regime, which is a remnant of both the French occupation before them, and also the support they get from Iran and so forth. But they want an actual return to their original, not Arabness, but their Islamic identity. Having said that, the people, they were, from my own conversations with them, they were, for the most part, ready and willing and wanting a revolution, a violent revolution where they would topple the government and so forth. This is something that they've been waiting for. When we talk about the foreign rebels who came into Syria, this should also be predicated by understanding that it's not like the foreigners just came in and they started all the violence and they started all the they started fighting back and so forth. It wasn't. That's not how it was. They came because they came to the aid and to the assistance of what they consider to be their brothers in Islam. So they came to support the fight against oppression and to establish what they hoped to be the next page in the history of not just Syria, but and not just the region, but actually of the entire world, specifically the Muslim world. So just that's my take on the rebels. Is I don't think we can necessarily disassociate them, or I should say the foreign rebels. I don't think we should disassociate them from the actual Syrian people. And this is a big problem, I think, that we're facing the media and so forth, is that we think that this is a Syrian issue. Yes, it's a revolution that is occurring inside what is now called Syria, which only 100 years ago was called the Levant, or in Arabic, Asham. And now, these new borders came up, and now we're calling it Syria. But the point being is that just because it's happening in Syria does not mean it does not affect even directly people all over, not just the region, but the world itself. There are people in Indonesia who are praying for Syria and are actively trying to go to Syria. There are actually a number of cases of Australians who've left Australia to go to Syria to fight, not because they are just interested in causing problems. They are there because they genuinely want to help the cause of Islam, not just establishing a Syrian or Arab state, but an Islamic state.
Right.
So that's all I wanted to add to that.
Right, Jim. Do you have any thoughts on that?
From Ireland, from Canada, from the U.S., from Libya, from Egypt, from around the world. It's not just. It's a global uprising in a way. They see their brothers dying, and I don't think you can really paint with a broad brush what their intentions are, but they feel emboldened to act. And I think your actions will speak for you, and that's what we can be judged on. It's not what we say; it's what we do. And I pray that the future Syria is for Syrians. It's not for U.S. policy. It's not for Russia. It's not for anybody else. But what Syrians wanted to create, and that was peace, equality. They want the opportunities they haven't had for 42 years. The people that are ready to line up and apologize and call Assad a reformer, they're getting fewer, and their excuses are getting less and less and more full of hot air. So, the people that have acted, the people that have done and sacrificed everything, they are not going to allow the people that have been killed to be dishonored. Now they're reporting 90,000 plus people dead. So, you wait 3 months and all of a sudden they add on 20,000 people. Those aren't just people. They have individual stories. This is a human tragedy that is not only going to be an I told you so moment for the world, but it's also going to be sending ripples out forever. I mean, these children are going to suffer, and their children are going to suffer for generations. And to tie any kind of political, partisan, conspiracist nonsense to it is to completely dispel the human element of what is happening. And it's a slap in the face for everybody that's died, whether they be a soldier that's picked up a weapon, an engineer or a hotel worker that was forced to learn how to use a weapon, to somebody that was in a peaceful movement that never ever wanted violence in their country, to go up to a soldier and say, please don't hurt my wife, turn around, and they get shot in the head. And that's happened, that's been confirmed, and these are the kind of tactics of fear, oppression, and brutality that have been persisting for 42 plus years. And there's no more apologizing anymore. There's no more blanket or veil against the truth anymore, because the internet is not going to allow Hama 1982 anymore. It's not going to allow what happened from Hafez al-Assad. And it's going to expose the agendas of the leaders of all the world, why they're doing what they're doing, and it's how people can link, unite, and grow stronger and change the world. So the world's not going back, and Syrians will never go on their knees again. And I can tell you that because Syrians have told me that. Not because I think I'm Syrian. I'm always going to be American. And before the revolution, I didn't even know Muslim, Arab in my whole life. It was only due to exposure and ignorance. So now I know different, and I know hundreds of them. I know Palestinians. I know Africans. I know Libyans. I know Egyptians. And they've all joined the Syrian uprising in solidarity. And everything that they do, they're tired. They're tireless, though.
Right. So
they're not going to give up on what they're doing.
So what I was going to ask, Joanne, do you hear us okay?
I do now. Yes, I got disconnected. I don't know why.
All right,
and then there was a message came up. I couldn't have multiple conversations at the same time. I don't know where that came from.
I'm sorry. Our platform unfortunately isn't perfect yet. But what I was going to ask you is, Joanne, from your reading and the material you get, and then you could all chime in on this. For those pro-Assad people who say that these rebels are doing a lot of the killings of average civilians inside of Syria, and they're coming from all sorts of countries with no intentions of really providing a real free Syria, and they're just there to kind of continue the chaos. I mean, what's your response to that, Joanne?
I don't believe that for 1 minute. I really do not. There might be a very, very tiny minority infiltrators, but on the whole, I think the Free Syrian Army are good people. They're just trying to get their people safe. They want their country back. They want to get rid of this monster that's doing the most horrendous things. I mean, Jim's not really hit on a lot of what happened. I mean, when you see some of the clips, these militias, they take a lot of the footage themselves. They take a delight in filming torture, rape, murder, and they're standing laughing over what they've done, and kicking their bodies after they've mutilated them, etc. It really is horrendous, and I just want to see a speedy end to this. Too many innocent people have been killed. People who are doing nothing to deserve it. They weren't fighters. Women and children in the home, standing in bread queues and getting bombed, standing in the market trying to get vegetables, children in the playground, the hospitals even, the doctors getting killed. Assad is a monster and he must be got rid of.
Right. Go ahead, Yahya, and then Jim, you can comment on that. Do you agree with what Joanne's saying? Because I mean, a lot of pro-Assad people come on here and they don't. That's really one of the things that they like to bring up, and more of me wants to think that it's quite possible that there are some there are plenty of rebels who could be just killing innocent civilians. What's your take on that? Yahya, are you there? Or Jim, do you want to respond?
Oh, he's gone.
It looks like you dropped out.
Okay.
Yeah.
Jim, what's your take on that?
Sorry. One more time on the question. I was waiting for him to answer, and I didn't.
Right. I was just, in regards to the rebels inside of Syria, and do you believe that the pro-Assad people who come on Vonvo and talk about how they're doing a lot of the killings of different people inside of Syria, innocent civilians? Do you think that might be true?
I don't think it's true. There's always isolated incidents. I mean, I couldn't say 100%, because I'm not there. But from what I hear, what I've seen, especially from the videos that Joan spoke of, I think a lot of the violence is on the Assad forces side and their militiamen, because this is what they benefit from the action. They scare people, they silence people, and they move people. They displace people. And I haven't seen any Free Syrian Army leveling houses with bulldozers that were Alawite. I haven't seen massacres with dialect that can be attributed to non-Alawite neighborhoods. What I've been told, what I've been informed of, is that in a lot of these videos, you can tell very well the dialect of the person speaking and filming. And I've seen occurrences where people have been, their mother was called, and they're saying, "Hi, we have your son here. He's a terrorist. We're going to go ahead and shoot him now." And they shoot him. So I've seen violence like that. Are there cases where Free Syrian Army and other versions of the fighting forces have done human rights violations? Absolutely. There's no way I would ever completely be biased. There's violence on both sides. And you have to judge people by their actions. And those actions have come to bear, and you can see them through videos. And there's propaganda on both sides that try and dispel, discourage, divide, misdirect what the videos stand for. And I've seen probably 100% of the cases where propaganda was obvious. It was on the side of the Syrian government or information that would propagate the propaganda of the Syrian government. So, are there abuses on both sides? Yes. Right. Is it grossly imbalanced in favor of more Assad forces committing these violent acts? Absolutely. Not only are they the ones that during massacres attack with tanks, artillery, airplanes, bombs, that the FSA early on did not have. But then also there are accounts. There are people that come forward, documented, confirmed confessions of people that give their actual accounts. They are from the neighborhoods this has happened in, have family members that are slaughtered. I hid under anything, or I hid under bodies, and then I experienced hearing as young as 16-year-old Alawite, or militiamen, or Shabiha, or whoever you want to, whatever name you want to use, whoever's doing the killing for Assad in Sunni neighborhoods, they hear them laughing, talking, children first, women next, and the men. So, and this isn't only men had weapons in their hands. These are whole families that were helping activists, that were helping, whether they be the information or the fighting or the generation of weapons or any communications at all. I mean, if you said Assad drove a silly Mercedes, you'd be killed. So believe me, when a regime wants to survive, what they will go to, what lengths they will go to, are beyond comprehension, beyond my small experience with the Middle East as an American.
Right.
And that's why I preface that I'm not in this for my ego. I'm not in this for any agenda at all. I see what I believe and what I've been informed myself from others and from my own research, what is the truth. And so I'm working in those efforts. I work for a radio station to help endeavor truth. Are we biased? In a sense we are, because we don't give the Syrian Sana al-Duwana news, because a lot of that has been disproved. We try and use reputable, and we try and use actual FFs that are in Syria.
Right.
Not outside Syria. We use LCC sources. We use other sources that are confirmed, that are on the ground. End of story, full stop. So I know what I see. I know what people die to film what they see. And I see that as the truth. And I use that, and I expose, and I use security as my main goal first. Anybody hurt in Syria. I wish, like hell, that nobody was dying. I don't want to see one more Alawite, one more Sunni, one more Druze, one more Christian, one more Martian get killed over there. I'm not in this because I like war. It makes me throw up to see this violence.
Right. Right. So
I have 2 kids of my own, and I see my children, I see the Syrian children reflected in their eyes.
Right. So
that's it.
Yeah. So Yahya, I just want to ask you the same question. Hear your response because I'm interested to hear it. There are pro-Assad individuals who come on Vonvo and talk about the rebels, doing a lot of the civilian casualties, killing innocent civilians, and then they say, that these rebels are from other countries, have zero reason to be inside of Syria. They're just causing more of the chaos and contributing to the chaos. What's your take on the rebel situation and what their real role is inside of Syria?
Well, other than what I already said about the rebels and the foreign rebels, and I don't really think that we should make a distinction between them and the Syrians on the ground. The Syrians who born and raised in Syria. I think we should kind of understand that if they're fighting for the same goal, then they are the same people, and the same goes on both sides. I think that it's actually wrong if we're going to criticize. I should say, since I don't criticize that the Syrian people have people coming from all over the world to help them, I don't think that we should criticize Iran for helping the Syrian government. It is what it is. We just have to recognize that this is the fight. In fact, it's better to know that who their enemy is rather than to be deceived into thinking it's somebody else. So yes, the Iranians back the Syrian regime. That's known. And Hezbollah backs the Syrian regime as well. They all share the same ideology. They're all from the Shia sect of Islam. And in fact, surprisingly, the Syrian regime is actually, as Jim stated, they're Alawi, which is actually an extreme branch of the Shia, which even some Shia don't even accept. But politically speaking, they're being backed by Iran, and they're being by other Shia forces like Hezbollah. So, what's to say that the other side? I'm sorry, go ahead.
Could you elaborate just a little bit on more of their cultural differences? Because I know that Alawites, for instance, they celebrate Christmas and things that perhaps Shia wouldn't.
Yeah.
Can you give us more of of their?
It's quite a long discussion, but I'll try to summarize it. All of these divisions started between the. I'll have to give a disclaimer. There's 5 main sects in Islam. Okay, we have Ahl Sunnah, we have Shia, we have Khawarij, Mu'tazila, Murji'a, and the Mu'tazila, if I didn't mention that, or the Shia. I'm sorry, I didn't mention Shia. So, but if we're just going to speak about the Sunni versus Shia perspective, first off, this happened it was a completely political situation at the beginning times of Islam. After the death of Muhammad ﷺ, there was a debate between who's going to be the next leader. To make a long story short, some people wanted Ali ibn Abi Talib, who was the cousin of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, to be the next leader, the next Khalifa, and those were called the Shia. Shia literally means supporters. So these were the Shia of Ali. They were the supporters of Ali. And in the beginning times of Islam, this was not seen as being a heretical view or anything else. This is a problem. There were people who wanted Ali to be the Khalifa, and there were people who did not want Ali to be the Khalifa. There was no violence directly involving that at that time. Even you'll see in Sunni sources in Sunni books of Hadith, for example, the Shia are given their due say, and in fact they're considered to be trustee and so forth, narrators of the religion and so forth. So they were accepted for the most part as such. What came later, though, was an attempt at the Shia. When they evolved to be something a little bit more than just a political group. It became a group that had beliefs altogether, elevating the status of Ali and his family. the Alawis came even later after that, and actually, technically, they're not even. If you look in the books, they're not called the Alawiya. They're not called the Alawis. The books are actually called Nusayri. And Nusayri, because of the original proponent of this belief, his name was Nusayr. So they're called Nusayri. In fact, in Syria today, you're not even allowed to say the word Nusayri. They say, no, we're Alawi. Why do they say Alawi? Because Alawi gives them some confidence. It gives them some legitimacy. Because basically what they're saying is, I support Ali. And that's what Alawi literally means. The beliefs of the Nusayri Alawis would be, first off, when I was in Syria, I looked long and hard for books explaining the Alawi beliefs. And I came to find out that they were actually, the books themselves were actually banned from learning the beliefs of the ruling party of Syria. And when I left Syria, I went to England and I started doing some more studies there. I found some ex-Alawis who had written on the topic, and they actually would explain how the Alawi belief is very much distant from the basic Islamic principles, which is that there's only one God and so forth. They started believing in a form of the Trinity. They started believing in that Ali and Hassan and Hussein were all divine beings and so forth. This is antithetical to even Shia Islam. Even the Shias, Lebanese Shia people have told me that they consider the Alawis not even to be Muslims. So, knowing that, I think we should disconnect the whole what's going on in Syria and the whole region. Disconnect slightly from the religious side, the belief side in this specific issue, because it is mostly a political issue. And I'm talking about the support Iran gives to Syria and Hezbollah gives to Syria and so forth. This is not like just purely religious support. There is some basis there, but it's not that. It's more so it's political. It's trying to expand its reach. That's understandable. They're a nation. They're allowed to do that. So that's the main difference. The people who are fighting back, obviously, it's no secret that the majority of the country are Sunni Muslims or identify as being Sunni Muslims. So they do use. One might call propaganda and so forth, saying that yes, we are rising up against the Alawis. And yes, this is true. They're rising up against the Alawis, and some people will attach the religious significance to that. Because in the Quran itself, it says, فَلَا تُطِعِ الْكَافِرِينَ, do not obey the disbelievers. Do not obey those who are not following religion. So if somebody, a Muslim who's a Sunni, looks at an Alawi and says he's not a Muslim, he should not be in charge over me. So since he should not be in charge over me, then I'm going to fight against him. And they use this logic, and it's actually sensible. You know, if you're following your book, you're following your religion, and your religion tells you to do things a certain way, just do it that way. So I think that I hope that answers that regarding just the rebels. Though I don't think we should separate the foreign rebels. And do they commit atrocities? It's war. War happens. If there's war, you're going to find people making mistakes and some people letting their emotions get the best of themselves. So I'm sorry for going on.
No,
Joan, you like to say something?
Yeah. I do as well. But I mean, the way the regime try to put propaganda out about what the rebels are doing. They accused the rebels of bombing Aleppo University. That was done by planes, in my information. And of course, FSA do not have aeroplanes. Well, they've got some now, but they're not in use. But the men in the river, I've found over 100 bodies in the river. They were not killed by the FSA. And why is it that whenever there's a massacre, I think Jim probably notices this, there's very often, not the car bombings in Damascus, they press TV or the state TV, they're so quick, they can't have been phoned up and said, "There's something happened here. Go and film it." They were too close. So and hello, little Yaya.
I have to be careful what I say. I don't want too much truth to cover on something younger.
Don't worry, I have headphones on. I've got headphones on. It's okay.
I have a 3 and 6-year-old too. They're gone. I'd have to back up what Joan's saying. Also, there's so much more to add. There's so much more to add to the truth of what you're saying, Joan. Early on, when the FSA and others, they were completely outgunned, when there was unexploded bombs and munitions, they would capture that. And there was a host of sources that were teaching both sides on how to make these improvised explosive devices.
Yeah.
And I would have to say, if you want to put it empirically speaking, maybe 1 to 6 of where the FSA were conducting bombings, car bombs, roadside bombs of convoys, and so forth, as opposed to the Assad side that wanted to carry on and help foster not only the violence and the sectarian division, but also the propaganda that there was these outside terroristic voices and forces coming into Syria, all in an effort to take a man out of his seat, which completely seemed vacuous to me. Because why? Well, why would you kill not only, let's say, the people that you supposedly hate in Alawite neighborhoods to get freedom, or why would you kill your own people to do that? And I've seen time and time again car bombs revealed to be from the Assad regime, from external Iraqi forces teaching them to do these things. Some of the same forces that we've battled with our American forces. And also, people from Russia and Iran that came in to logistically, very secretively and sublimely, embolden the forces so that they can make it seem like there's terrorists coming in. You see their action. It's Al-Qaeda. I mean, they screamed Al-Qaeda before they even knew who was really in Syria. So, and there were many ways that these bombings were revealed to be from the Assad regime, and a few of them they were able to define that the explosives that were used were from the Assad government. That the areas that they were targeting, not only were they in populated areas, but they were in areas in front of Assad headquarters and so forth. But just enough that wasn't really killing or destroying much of the building, although it did have, collateral damage. You can't have it without, you can't have a bomb without people that you didn't want to get killed. And that helped the argument of, but the majority of the people were on the streets. The majority of these attacks that even the Assad government tries to claim is from the terrorists are after Friday Mosque, are after, people are populating the areas. And there's secondary explosions involved in order to bring in people from the street, completely innocent people, to be targeted. There's also evidence that these people were in various states of dress, various states of decomposition, whether they be tortured people, whether they be people that had prior gunshot wounds, whether they be tied up, whether they be in underwear with no shoes. I'm sorry, they're on the street and there's a car bomb and somebody's walking around with no underwear or underwear on. So, I mean, there's been very many ways to disprove and propaganda also that makes it seem like it's the FSA conducting all these car bombs. And that's happened early on. And like I said, you have to judge somebody by their actions. Not by the news, not by the propaganda, by what you see. Material. And you can see that evidence. You can see for yourself what the truth is. Not by religious bias, not by political agenda, not by the lack of sources, but you have to go through the sources that you're using for information. I'd be the first to admit, news is not really the news. You have to go through it. You have to see what the motivations are. You have to see who's benefiting from these things. Not just what they're trying to tell you, what your own mind can help you to understand. You have to do your own research. You cannot just take it on face value. You can't just paint, okay, everyone's doing this. No, there's both happening on both sides. But there's a reason why the propaganda exists. And so you have to take that direction and reveal whose propaganda is false, whether it be the U.S., whether it be IRTV, whether it be Press TV, whether it be Hannity and Holmes, any of the sources are completely able to be wrong and able to be found to be corrupt or under a certain agenda. So you have to take kind of all the news. And I watch Sana, I watch Alduana, I hear their sources, and I also see them revealed. And that's what I wanted to say on as far as the violence that's taking place and how that propaganda is being used kind of to misdirect and to help kind of like this conspiracy theory. And of course, there's intervention from all around the world on both sides. I'm not going to sit here and completely be biased like that. And that's what I just wanted to kind of add to the conversation. If anybody wants to disprove me, go ahead.
I don't think we can disprove that, Jim.
I mean,
but they're not getting 160 jets. The rebels are not getting 160 jets from anywhere, are they?
No,
they're not getting all these tanks from anywhere.
I see 130 coming from Russia that are specifically designed to target people, civilian populations. Okay, now this contract was canceled at the very beginning of the revolution, and now I'm getting reports that it's back on. And I've seen nothing but weapons coming into the government to aid the government of the Syrian regime. And I've seen weapons on the side of the FSA coming in too. But I've also heard reports from FSA that the CIA came, met with them, promised them, assured them, gave them no date, and never, ever gave them any weapons. So maybe they're there on an advisory standpoint. And I know from pictures that they're there in Jordan to train people to get prepared for chemical attacks, which that's confirmed. Nobody in the world would tell you they don't have chemicals or nuclear power. This is the Syrian government, I tell you. And I don't believe for a second that the Assad regime has control over those munitions. And here in the United States, I can tell you what our president says, and he draws an obscenely disgusting red line over the use of chemical weapons, but yet draws some kind of distinction over the outrage that should be shared by the world, over 90,000 people being killed. And I love my country, but I love it so much that I appreciate the freedom that I've been given as a right, and I want to protect that. And I see our government as completely hypocritical, and I don't support them in any of their policies, much less in Afghanistan. We should not be there. We should be gone out of there. And there's many things that the United States government is guilty of, culpable of, complicit of, and it should be exposed for. And I'm not going to stand here as an American, as a patriot, and say otherwise, because I wouldn't be loving my country. And if somebody's going to claim that I'm on some soapbox, I can assure you right now, I'm on solid ground. And I'm not here for my own well-being. I'm not getting paid a dime. This is on my weekend. I could be with my children right now. But this is more important. They're with my mother or my wife, so they're happy, and it's a beautiful thing. So I'm happy to be here. But I'm not going to tell you for a second that I'm diluted or that I have an agenda. I only want the truth, and I want to help people in the world, and I want more love than war that's going on. And I see so many people dying, and now I know to not be ignorant and not be fearful of Muslims, of Islam, of anybody. If our actions can be sound and we can give love to the world, then that's our main mission. But freedom and dignity for people, and you cannot be happy, you can't be peaceful if you don't have freedom. That's just my personal views. Other people can disagree. Whatever, that's fine. If you're happy and you're not hurting anybody, kudos to you. That's cool for me. So, if anybody wants to add, how they feel about the world, about what's going on, I would love to hear your opinions.
If I may, I just wanted to make a comment on something that Jim said earlier, which is I think is really good. Specifically, that if a person or people or a group of people are being killed or being massacred, being fought against, and then somebody comes along, no matter how distrusted or how bad this person is, and says, "Hey, I'll give you the weaponry you need to fight back against this force that's coming after you." And to give I guess a more a different analogy is that if someone holds a gun to you and is about to shoot you, and you don't have a gun, and then somebody, but he's possibly even your worst enemy, and this other person gives you a gun, you'll take it. You're not going to say, no, I'm just going to use my hands to fight back against this gun. No, I'll take the gun and I'll fight back. So this is actually like what happened in Afghanistan, for example. With the support that the Americans gave to the Mujahideen in Afghanistan. Now, a lot of people have a big problem that they constantly voice, even until today, about the assistance that was given in Afghanistan. But the truth is there's nothing Islamically or otherwise this is saying that this is what happened was wrong. If someone gives you a weapon, you can use it. It's different if they're giving you the weapon and you promise them that you're going to implement something that's in their favor, for example. But if they're just saying, look, we just want to help you, yeah, you're going to, for example, in Afghanistan, America is against Russia, and Russia is against Afghanistan, so we are on the side of Afghanistan. So here you go, take these weapons, fight against Russia. Same thing in Syria. If Iran is the perpetrator, and America wants to fight against Iran, as what we call a proxy war, then by all means, give the Syrian people the weaponry and let them fight. The Syrian people will be happy with that. But here comes the issue is that what happens afterwards. Okay, and this is where I think definitely America got it wrong, and a lot of people around the world got it wrong when it came to Afghanistan, and it will probably be the same case with Syria. You cannot expect that the people, once they've defeated their enemy, that they're going to automatically just say, "Oh well, thank you, America, so much. We want to implement what you want us to implement. We want to do what you want us to do, and everything else." No, thank you for the help you gave us, but now that you have to back off and have to also understand Syrian people, for example, and I'm just mentioning Syrian people, but this is the truth for people all over the region and all over Muslim world. They're not very happy with America's relationship with Israel, and that will constantly be a hindrance to anything that will move American interests forward in the Middle East. No, how can they imagine that the Syrian people, after they regain their freedom, how they're going to just automatically change all of their beliefs and their mentality and everything else to an American mindset is not just far-fetched, but it's a bad policy to begin with to imagine that they would do that. So after it's all said and done, it's important that the American, not just the government, but also the public, understand that if you're going to support these people, don't expect that after it's all said and done, that you're going to have a new ally in the region to put forward your own democratic reforms and your own democratic ideas for the region. No, you can't expect that, because that's not what these people are fighting for to begin with. They're not fighting for democracy. People need to understand, they are not fighting for democracy. You might have a few protesters out there, or even hundreds, 3,000 saying democracy. But one thing I've learned, I speak Arabic fluently, I speak English fluently, and most of the people who are applying democracy don't know what democracy means. They understand it to mean something different. They think democracy is synonymous with freedom. That's what they think, and it's not. We know that democracy is a form of government, and it's a way of achieving how you elect your leaders and manage your laws and so forth. They just see it as being democracy means I'm allowed to say what I want, and that's incorrect. But that's what the people think. So we need to understand that just because we see on the news, whether it's CNN, Fox, or RT, Press TV, whatever, you see a bunch of people saying, we want democracy, we want democracy. Rest assured, they do not want democracy. they want what they think is democracy, which is not what we, when we're speaking English, what we mean when we say democracy. So that's just another point to consider.
I agree with some of your points. Yeah. Yep.
Please tell me which ones you disagree with, so we can move on to that.
Well, I really don't think for a minute, and pardon my expletives, that only Americans, but our leadership gives two shits in a Gucci bag for anything, for what comes next in Syria. I think the bouncing ball they're watching is how they look to the world, how they appear to the world, and also the weapons that might foster more instability. Up to this point, they've seemed completely detached from any kind of actions. You can't throw money at bleeding people. You know, you might as well send body bags. So the non-lethal aid that they've pledged, not only has it not come as quickly or expediently as other actions that we've taken around the world, but it's been completely ill-intentioned. It's like lip service for humanity. And that's why when people say it's a conspiracy, this, that, and the other, it's an intervention, we want a regime change, it's a bunch of bullshit. Because I feel that that there's some things that still the world doesn't know, and probably that Assad knows. A little bit of background of what's going on in the world that, you know, the rest of the world, common people, don't know about. I think there's a lot of things that are at play that still haven't been revealed as far as the true agenda of the nations of the world. And so I don't think for a second that Americans either expect what they feel should happen in Syria, you know, should be next, and I don't think that they even care. I think they don't want it in the news. I think they're so detached and so willfully ignorant that they would rather watch, you know, Kim Kardashian on a porno or football than to care about anything or any blood being spilled in Syria. And that's a tragedy to me. And I don't feel righteous from it, I mean, knowing the truth or looking for the truth, but I try and help other people to try and reach past their nose. And so I kind of disagree with you in the sense that Americans, if they were to come in and help, which they're never going to do, that they would expect some kind of return out of it. Because they're not in the fight. They're not doing the actions that could affect change. They're worried about more about what's next, and they want to set up a diverse set of people that could possibly lead or help transition Syria into what it could become. But I think more often than not, they seem to be taking the side of having people that are in the regime already, maybe not Assad, also in place. And I don't know if that's lip service to all of the different diverse people that represent Syria, or if it's for other, you know, far darker reasons. So I kind of disagree with you in the fact that we assume that if we, with our army, all this other, that we have the power, if we help, that we expect something. I don't think we expect nothing, because we've already realized there's no oil, there's no risk-benefit situation that is on our side to be involved. So it's been more about how we cannot be involved. And in relation to Israel and our relationship with Israel, I'm disgusted by it, to be honest. I think Israel has people have a right to protect themselves. Do they need to be heavy-handed about it? Do they need to go in and, even if there's terrorists, or however you want to name them, in these areas where they bomb, I don't think it's right. I don't think it's right we're killing people with drones. So, as far as our relationship, we give Israel all this money to help with the Iron Dome, and then they don't back up their actions with their policies when they start building into these settlements that they're not supposed to be doing, when they control the water, when they do these things that are hurting people. I see this as a violation of the relationship we're supposed to have with them. We embolden their regime with helping them to protect themselves, no matter what that agenda is intentioned for, and then we don't get anything back from it by the very bad actions of the government. If they are going to murder people, then we ought to be objectioning. We ought to be condemning that. We ought to be saying, just like we did with Egypt, you release these people that you have captive, or we're not going to give you this, money that we're going to give you, these millions of dollars. Those are the kind of actions that our leaders are showing to unveil the fact that there's a lot of puppet strings being pulled. None of them are for the people. It's for the government. It's for the agenda. It's for money. It's for power. And I think that, once you reveal those agendas, then I think you can kind of come to the conversation and realize that governments are no longer for people, and the people need to unite and reveal that source and reveal the fact. Full stop.
It looks as though Yaya's been disconnected again.
But I don't think that our government's in bed with Israel. I really don't. I think there's some controls. There's some relationships, but there's a lot of push and pull. Because if we were so in favor of Israel, we would be all over Syria. We'd be sticking it into the ass of Assad, because it would weaken the connection from Hezbollah. It would weaken these. It would strengthen the borders, and it would stop this happening. If we were worried about stability, we would be more involved. This is another reason why it just completely disproves this whole conspiracist theory. You want to say that we're sublimely pulling strings? Sure, we're pulling strings to make this go on and on and on and on. We're giving every opportunity to Assad and people that back him to get weapons in there, to keep weapons from going to the Free Syrian Army and others. We're stopping that from happening. We're protecting NATO interests with Patriots. We're not saving lives in Syria with Patriots. If we're so involved, why aren't we doing more to stop the massacres? Why aren't we doing more with our satellite imagery to reveal the movement of the Assad army, to embolden the news sources, to give more truth? If America was so involved in destroying and also being in bed with Israel, we'd be sticking it in Syria's ass, and that would in turn weaken Iran. And in some ways, I think our government, is subtly helping the Assad regime, but also at the same time destroying a lot of people that are coming into the country to help both sides. And at the same time, there's collateral damage of children and women, and I think it's all disgusting. It's like some grotesque theater of destruction that's happening, and then it's terrible. And I think the world leaders are complicit, and if not hypocritical, they're guilty of you say coming to the protection of a government. I say emboldening genocide. When it comes in the terms of Russia, when it comes in the term of Iran, Hezbollah, some Lebanese forces, some Iraqi Mahdi armies, and I find it disgusting and objectionable, and it's not all balanced. Like I said, there's abuses on both sides, but I see our government. I mean, just as an American, I see us holding people back. I see us building time. And in some ways, we benefit because there are forces that are counter our objectives getting killed. But at the same time, there's 300% of the deaths being committed are general civilians. They have nothing to do with anything. And
That's right.
I'm not going to go over numbers, but there's a ton of civilian deaths. And as far as I've known from the last numbers that I've seen, is maybe 7,000 FSA that have been killed. So I mean, if you take that number and you subtract it from 90,000, and then maybe I don't know. I guess I don't know exact figures, but if it were going to be Syrian army that were killed, I'd have to believe it's not double 7,000. I could be wrong, but the vast majority of the death toll are civilians. And there are people that have been displaced and moved 3, 4, 5 times, and they still end up getting killed. There's people in refugee camps that are being targeted outside of their country. There's been refugee camps shot at from the Syrian army. Those aren't FSA trying to kill people that have left for safety. There's mine. There's a host of confirmed illegal weapons being used. Mines, initially from the Syrian army. They're the only ones that had them. Defected soldiers don't, put borders along the mines to kill people that are leaving the country. There's tons of illegal weapons. There's cluster bombs. There's thermobaric bombs. There's barrel bombs being dropped completely indiscriminately on civilian populations. I don't care if there's one FSA in a building of 100 people. That's not the way to conduct a war. You want to call it a civil war? Don't fight it like genocide then. I don't know if you have anything else to add.
I see what you're saying, and my only comment would be that it depends on how you look at it, I suppose, in terms of Israel and America's support in the region and so forth. Are they supporting Assad by their action/inaction, or are they supporting the Syrian people by this and so forth? It could go different ways. Obviously, an unstable Syria would definitely work in the favor of Israel. Having an unstable region is in the favor of Israel. Because if you had a stable region but with a power who is against Israel, and they try to, I'll get to you in just a second, and if they have a stable, and I'll just use for example, I don't want to come off as sounding like a conspiracy theorist or anything, but I do have my beliefs. If there was an Islamic State, specifically a Khilafah, which is being called for by Jabhat al-Nusra and various other groups inside Syria and outside Syria, all over the Muslim world. They're hoping to establish the Khilafah again. And if that is established, America, for example, will have issue with their oil supply. They will have issue with their regional presence here in this region. Israel would have a huge problem on their hands because they would have virtually a huge force against them. If we know what the Khilafah entails and so forth, which I think we can get into another time. But specifically, the point being is that I think right now it's better from American eyes to see an unstable region. It's better to deal with chaos than it is to deal with a strong, stable government. Which that's sorry, that's just my take. I know that somebody could say the exact opposite is the case, and that's why it's really neither here nor there. That's why I try to look at solutions rather than addressing just the problem. But go for it.
Well, I see that Israel is building another wall. So you say that they benefit from an unsecure Syria, but they're building a wall. And also, I saw a lot of people outraged when Israel opened its borders for 7 people that got wounded there. I didn't hear anybody pitching a fit when Israel struck a chemical plant or convoy. It's still a little foggy, of forces that were Hezbollah that were going to come and get chemical weapons or weapons of some sort. Nobody said diddly boo about Israel coming in, striking that area, destroying it. I didn't see anybody come. And how many bullets have been fired into Israel in the last 40 years? But how many Palestinians have been killed? Tons in Yarmouk camp and all around Syria. So the people that are supposedly supposed to protect Palestinians are killing them. That's what I see. And I see Israel not benefiting from a complicit Assad regime who was protecting that area. And there wasn't any security concerns. But I see now Israel's very concerned. Now that the Assad regime could fall, all of a sudden they're building real quickly another wall. And so, and even telling their journalists not to be on the border because, you're in danger. This isn't some kind of frickin' movie you can watch. You're in danger. There's bullets going across now. So I don't really see how your argument holds water when it comes to Israel would benefit from Assad being gone.
Well, can I, if I may, and then pass it over to John. I'm sorry, I know that it's been back and forth between me and Jim, but if I could just comment, I can see that, you know, it could be this or that. I'm not saying that it's necessarily one way or the other, but what I will say is that during the time of instability is, I should say, a lot better. From Israel's perspective, the instability would be better than having a stable enemy. Assad, whether somebody wants to call him an enemy to Israel, I'm sorry, but you can look back throughout history. He had plenty of opportunities to do something against Israel, and he did nothing. His father gave the Golan Heights, you know, away. So there's a lot that can be said that they had a diplomatic relationship with Israel. Syria and Israel had diplomatic relationships, even if it was behind closed doors or whatever. Clearly, they had some form of diplomacy. But what they could fear next is that the rise, and I think I'm probably more involved, not directly, but because I'm a Muslim and I hear the voices of Muslims around me as well, saying that, you know, they do want an Islamic State in Syria. They want an Islamic State. You have to remember that Damascus was the capital of the Umayya Khilafah, and that's actually being played upon by, whether you want to call it propaganda, by the Jabhat al-Nusra and others, that this is the land of the Khilafah. And people are taking hope and benefit from that this is possibly where we can establish, get it all reestablished. If that happens, then certainly Israel needs a wall because they're going to have trouble. They're going to have a huge problem on their hands. Iraq, you know, Afghanistan, Yemen, Somalia, Libya, Egypt, everywhere in the region, you know, they're becoming more and more aware that we need to return back to the Islamic. If we want our glory, that look, the Arabs and the Muslims have a glorious history. Hugely glorious history, but that was only during the time of the Khilafah, and people are waking up and realizing that their glory was only during the time when the golden age was only during the time of a Khilafah. It was never during the time of a democratic or socialist or communist or any other type of regime being present in the region. Now, knowing that, and knowing that people are waking up to that understanding, and going back to the Quran and reading what the Quran actually says about these things, because you have to understand, a lot of people, they were raised from many Americans in America, many Christians in America, they're raised without really reading the Bible. They just believe whatever their parents say or whatever their priest says or whatever. They don't necessarily go back and look it up. Some people do, some people don't. That's how it has been here for many generations. So, but now people are actually going back and reading and they're realizing, wait a sec, it says in the Quran, وَأَخْرِجُوهُمْ مِنْ حَيْثُ أَخْرَجُوكُمْ, expel them from where they've expelled you. Okay, Allah is commanding the Muslims to kick out whoever conquers you. If you have land and someone conquers it, fight against them until you kick them out. So now Israel, obviously, Muslim land, you know, so people are waking up and saying, look, we need to take that back. It needs to be taken back. And I won't put it past Israeli security forces and so forth. They know these things. They're not completely ignorant people. They know who their enemy is, and their enemy wants that land back. So obviously they're going to build walls, and they have a genuine fear. If you look back at some of the things that Cheney and Kissinger and so many others said specifically about the reestablishment of a Khilafah, someone could say, oh, that was just him talking, that was just him blowing smoke, whatever. But then you see, now actually there is some truth to his fear that people are waking up and they do want a Khilafah. You will be very hard-pressed to find any Muslim who actually, if you said, don't you think it would be great to have a true Islamic State, you know, back in power? You will hear a resounding, yes, we do want a true Islamic State. Now, how that will look, and is it what Somalia has? No. Is it what Afghanistan has? No. Is it? No, but if we try our best to imagine what it could be and look at what the sources and so forth said that it should be, then you'll see somebody if they have the right person can establish that, you will get a lot of support from around the world, from all the Muslims, and talking about over 1 billion people. Let's even say if it was half that, 500 million people. I mean, come on, that's a huge amount of support for one thing. So I think that's really why they're trying to build up their security in Israel, obviously, and throughout the world. America knows that there's a rising tide of people with Islamic beliefs and Islamic ideology, political Islam. No problem, take care. And I think that we just have to recognize that it's not so much like what the media wants us to believe it is. I think it's a little bit. There's a voice missing from the media, and that's one thing I've noticed. I'm sure. I don't know how often you see a quote-unquote Islamist come on Fox News and actually give a really good argument for their cause, or if you go to CNN and see an Islamist give a good argument for his cause. It's a voice that's missing, but yet it's a voice that they're telling us is extremely important these days. Yet we're not hearing it, so maybe it's something we should listen to.
For the first time, there was a Muslim woman that's now a news anchor in American TV. First ever. And that was earlier this year. So I think you're absolutely true. All demographics should be able to have all the opportunities, and you don't see it. And I think that's something that should be addressed. And certainly women's issues are another thing that should be addressed. I feel there's still a huge amount of inequality. And I wondered if you could elaborate as far as Islam on how Sharia law would enter what you think could happen in future Syria. If you think that that's something that would dominate the majority or minority of what people want in Syria or not. Because I know a lot of people, at least, not only direct hate towards Sharia law, but also towards Islam in general because of that. And I think that anybody has extremists. We have extremists here in America. They're called Westboro Baptist. They go and they protest military funerals, and they attribute gay people to deserving to die. And those kind of hate messages, I think, are a way that religion is misused in the world to hurt people and divide people. And I would love to hear any kind of elaboration on Sharia, how it enters Islam, and how it could possibly change what happens in Syria.
Okay. I promise I'll let Joan speak, but if you want, I can go.
No, you can carry on. I really enjoy it. I'm going to myself in a couple of minutes.
Okay. Well, it was very lovely speaking with you.
I've enjoyed speaking to you too, Yaya.
Thank you. Okay, so basically, like I actually, with my previous comment, something I wanted to elaborate on. I don't know if this is the right discussion because it's just about Syria, but I guess it applies everywhere. There's a certain understanding of what Islam is, and there's different understandings of Islam. There's like in every political system, even democracy, you'll have one person say, I believe democracy is one thing, and another person say, I believe democracy means something else. So the same thing does happen in Islam. Now, even amongst Sunnis, even amongst a single sect of people, there'll be different opinions about different things. However, in Islam, there are, I'm trying to give a short introduction. Laws and regulations and everything in Islam are based upon what the Quran says and what the Sunnah says. And even according to Shia and everybody, they do accept the Sunnah, and a lot of people say, oh, Sunnis follow the Sunnah. So do Shia. They just follow a different understanding of the Sunnah and what it entails. But there's the Quran, which is the word of Allah, the word of God, and there is the Sunnah, which is the word of Muhammad, which we believe is inspired from God. So regardless, it's all coming back from God. So we could say it is a theocratic system. Now, the other principle, another principle that must be applied in any Islamic society is what's called ijma in Arabic, which means consensus, which means when everybody agrees upon something, then that is the law. Now, what does that entail? What exactly does that entail? It does not mean that if, we're three people, so when we three people come together and we all agree upon something, then that's the law. That's not what it means. In fact, it goes back to looking through history, looking at the time of the Prophet Muhammad, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, what did his companions and all the people around him, what is something that they all agreed upon? For example, they all agreed that there's only one God. They all agreed that a Muslim has to pray 5 times a day, and so forth. These are things they all agreed upon. They also agreed upon certain things being illegal, like consuming intoxicating drink is considered illegal. They all agreed upon this. So in an Islamic state, this is, for lack of better words, and this is the word that I choose to use, though I'm sure a lot of people disagree with me. For lack of better words, the ijma, or the consensus, is like our constitution. Okay, a lot of people say, oh, well, Quran is the Constitution. I agree with that. Quran is the Constitution as well. At the same time, though, a lot of people have different understandings of what the Quran means. So, but as far as ijma, consensus, these are the things that everyone agrees upon. So, and there's a lot of points. There's a lot of different things. So, for example, I'll use the issue about theft. For example, if someone steals in society, someone steals, what should the punishment be? Now, someone might say,